This game right here has somehow made its way into Graveblade, the game that I'm making, and I wasn't expecting it. It's one of my favorite Zelda games, easily my favorite handheld Zelda game, and by the way, the music is incredible in that game. But I didn't realize until I was messing around with something that it could actually be a game mechanic. So let's break it down. Recently, I posted a video about a debug that I'd set up in my game, and it's very similar to Zelda Minish Cap, where you shrink down from normal size Link to tiny size Link and you explore the whole world in a completely different way. But that's quite hard to do in the Unreal Engine. Oh wait, yeah, I already did that. So the whole problem was getting the right size. So it's 0.01 size of the original character, and that has its own problems, aka moving speed. This was more of a challenge than I thought it would be. There are complications doing this. We are not making a character and then making the whole world look massive around it. The world is already established. There's nothing we can do about that. We can't just scale it up. We have to live and exist tiny in an already established place. So like any aspiring game developer out there, I thought the easiest route would be the best route. And well, it didn't turn out to be that great. I just set the character speed to be slower, and now the blend space does not work, aka those speeds do not reflect well on the animations. So I just dragged them down, thinking that would do the job, and again I just set it up on the anim graph, hoping for the best. So I thought the easiest route would be to create a child. For example, if you have one character and then you create a child of them, that child then listens to anything that happens to this and updates to it, meaning you can't really do too much with it, but you could do for, let's say, hey, walk slower so you don't look so fast, and that would work. But this character has its own animation setup, its own blueprint, and this character, if it's going to be slower, it gets affected by every single thing, and the complications just went on and on. So I don't actually have the footage of what happens after this, but I decided to just create a duplicate of the character Graveblade, just make it absolutely tiny, and then create its own animation blueprint as well. So it's got its own animation rig that it runs on, and there's no complications. It's already got the existing code. So anything that I add to Graveblade going forward, I'm going to have to copy and put over to the mini version of Graveblade, but that is worth its weight in gold. That means I don't have to go into Graveblade and adjust a ton of things in there just to compensate for the mini version. Everything can now just be dealt with mini, and that's absolutely much tidier and much easier to manage, and less prone to breaking as well. Now, I came across this spot here. This was the first time I actually found it. I caught it on recording as the first location for one of my mini little dungeons. I think it's going to be perfect, and actually it turned out really well. You'll see that at the end of the video. Firstly, I needed to map it out, so I blocked out a kind of idea of how I want the dungeon to look, and then, well, you can't just scale it down, as that can happen, which isn't ideal. So what you're going to have to do is kind of lock them in together as one whole entity and then scale them down. But the problem with this time was that I went into it and I completely crashed my engine just pressing the single button, and I had to restart it and then recreate it all over again because everything was lost. As you'll see here, I go create the blueprint, go, and it just freezes. So I have to force quit it. Honestly, this happens way more than often, especially in Unreal Engine. If you're having this problem a lot, make sure you verify your engine. If you don't know how to do that, all you have to do is go to where your engine settings are at the top, click on that yellow triangle button and say verify. It actually fixes more problems than you're aware of. Now we get to build the blueprint, the entire dungeon out of a blueprint. It was just a bit of hit and miss. I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to go about it, but I did want really chunky rocks because you're going to be tiny. They need to look really chunky and massive. And this was the end result. This was me at full size. So this is actually massive. And so then what I needed to do was to shrink it down and place it into a little gap that I've placed here. There are some other challenges, mainly being that you can't actually cut tiny holes out of the landscape. And also, by the way, this is how big it is in the game, which is just ginormous. So I had to shrink it down. There were some complications with it. It wasn't actually 0.01 at this point. It was like 0.005 or something like that, which was, it was just way too small. But at 0.01, it was still quite big. So I had to kind of do a little bit tweaking here and there, and you're just watching me kind of struggle with it. But I did get there in the end. Now, testing it, there was a slight issue, and as you can see, I just fell through the landscape. Now, due to the way that you have a visibility tool in the landscape, it doesn't cut perfectly like a circle, it cuts like a weird shape, meaning every time I'd just fall through the floor where the landscape visibility was. So I just created like a little bit of a safety barrier, just putting some meshes in like this, and it's still really small. And so you go back to this one and it's nice and big, and that's the kind of vibe that we wanted to go for, a really big dungeon. So again, back to the drawing board with this one. I need it at least this size right here. Maybe I've overshot the estimated size, I'm not too sure. So the first thing that I thought was, if I create a slight tunnel going towards the dungeon, it won't interfere with the stairs as much as they were, meaning you could go down a slight pathway and get to the said entrance, and so you don't interfere with any of those meshes. And it kind of worked, as you'll see. But then we had the complication that the stairs were already half pre-built. They were like a prefab, meaning I couldn't do much editing with them. So I had to rebuild most of the staircase myself. I could have gone about it the real easy way and just had that moved out the way, but I wanted like a proper, you know, reusable, kind of broken apart by the landscape kind of vibe, and this was what I ended up with. So a little bit more tidying up here and there just to cover up any of the areas where it looked like you could just see too much or there was too much light coming in. I really wanted it to feel like a little dungeon or a massive dungeon, depending on the size that you are. Also, whilst you're here, let's talk about tiny objects. So there's a tiny house here. You can't access it as full size, but tiny size can absolutely get inside there and have a little mosey around. Look what's going on inside there. There's actually no NPCs, but there will be. I don't know what they're going to look like yet. I guess we'll find out at some point soon. Anyway, I just replicated a ton of these houses just for placeholders. I'm going to vary them up at some point. And then I thought this will be a really cool hidden area. This section here was really dying for something interesting. And I thought if I could have like a hidden mini village over in this section, it's just going to be incredible. Anyway, let's jump back to our dungeon very quickly. Let's, oh, 1 second. Just got to deal with this guy. They always find me at the worst possible time. Let's just burn him out of it. All right, so let's try and get in. As you can see, we can't get in. That's perfect, because now we can turn into Mini Graveblade, which we haven't got a name for yet. But let's be real, it's kind of like Minish Cap. That's the whole vibe. Anyway, let's click that button. Let's get in. What is going on in here? Look at the world. It looks so much cooler from a 0.1 size, doesn't it? It looks wicked. So the grass actually looks all right. It could be better, let's be real. But let's get inside. Some of the meshes, some of the materials might need tweaking. Maybe I need to do some type of scale adjustment when they go down. But for now, it's not too bad. It really isn't. It just looks stupidly pretty, even still, when you're shrunken down. Heading in, we've got a ton of dust particles. Again, they look absolutely massive when you're shrunken down, but they really don't in game. So I'm going to have to think of a way around that one. And we can see we've got some cobwebs. We've got some kind of crystals. I think the vibe I was going for was like there's a certain type of crystal that you have to require, or like a certain type of crystal will give you an ability. I don't really know just yet how I'm going to go about that part in the story, but you definitely have to go into these type of mini dungeons. And there is something lurking in the corner. Now, I'm absolutely terrified of spiders, but I've gone for it just because it makes the most sense just to place them in there. I'm sure you're wondering right now. I know you are. What happens if you turn back into normal size Graveblade? That's what happens. You just can't get out. You're stuck. I'm going to have to think of a way for people not to do that, because they're going to do that. And I do want people to have as much fun as they can. I don't like saying no. And I mean that in the way that I grew up with the N64 and Banjo-Kazooie, and you could just do all of these crazy things in those games. And I just want to be able to say, you can try it, but it will fail, and you just come out as like a cube version of Graveblade that's all squashed and, you know, like compressed down. And that's what's going to be going through with this game. I want people to be like, there is no limit. Anyway, so I've done a bit more work on this little forest area over here. Again, it is far from finished. I thought it looked really darn cool. I just want to kind of like hide it from like the Phoenix can't get to it that easily. I want it to be like only accessible as the mini version of Graveblade. So I've put this giant tree over there to kind of like, I don't know, go for some type of tree vibe. Not at all referencing a giant tree that's in a whole lore of the whole other game. This tree is just a tree for now. Maybe at some point I will do a tree dungeon. I'm not going to lie, it's on the cards. Well, how do we get in here? Well, I've not really figured that one out, but I do know it's the gap. I want there to be a gap that you can't access, but you can see through. And this is where you somehow get your ability. I want to be able to find one of those many people in the world that they are lost, and you take them to that point and they go through and they give you the ability to shrink, to say thank you, or the family want to say thank you for saving them. I think that's just beautiful. There are points where the grass is just overkill, and I'm gonna have to think about sorting that out because it's just, you know, as you can see here, there's just too much grass. But there are points where the grass just goes away and it looks really, really nice. And anyway, back to normal size. This is what the village looks like. Again, there's not much going on in here yet. Everything is a yet emphasized because it's still in development. You might be watching this right now and it might be a way ahead than what it was when I filmed this. And I know what you're thinking. What happens if I return back to normal size Graveblade inside this house? Of course, that's what happens. Again, you were expecting it. So the pros and cons, you can fall through gaps when you're small. You can actually get under gaps though and get through a whole gate system that you can't do. You can hide from an enemy running through a fence and hopefully not run into, oh, okay, maybe there are enemies in here as well. This one's actually trying to kill me, so we are going to leg it. This guy looks terrifying, but he's actually a really friendly guy. Now, it wouldn't be a video without killing some enemies with a bit of explosive phoenixes. There you go, blow them up, set them alight. And if the Phoenix fire doesn't kill them, burn them with fire. I also noticed that my fire's firing out my butt at the moment. I must have accidentally flipped it in the viewport at some point. Anyway, most of the characters are now dead. And if all else fails, let's just leg it and fly away as a beautiful Phoenix wolf. Okay. I actually haven't done much with the wolf yet, so maybe that'll be another video. Okay, that was quite chunky, I guess. It's the first time I've done a proper YouTube video on this page. I've posted some clips and stuff like that. But I do appreciate you joining us for the ride. If you want to see tons more stuff, then by all means follow us on TikTok or, of course, on here on YouTube where we post shorts as much as I possibly can. Also, I teach people how to make video games. That's been my job for the last 5 years. Click the link in the description if you want to learn from me. I will be having a course coming out pretty soon. But if you want to have some one-to-ones or join a group class, by all means, send us a message or just go to the link and you'll see all of the stuff on there. Otherwise, I have been George64. I will see you soon. Goodbye.